Right then, Francis Bacon, part 2. And hopefully you've taken a break since the part 1. I think it's quite deep, quite heavy stuff. And I realised I didn't answer the question about the salesman. You know, how long is it that a salesman can remain silent before feeling compelled to say something to break the awkward silence? 10 seconds? 5? Nah, 0.6. And if we think about that in regard to user experience or asking insightful questions, it doesn't leave a lot of space for cognitive processors to come up with new ideas or insights or for them to have any kind of deep reflection. Instead, it's a gish gallop or a steamrollering, and people do not appreciate that, I think. They know that they're being gish galloped into a yes, yes, yes train. And it infuriates me listening to online debates where people talk over each other. Well, there's just no ability to leave space for people to think. I was also interested to watch the latest televised debates. It seems it's just a shouting match, and any pause is taken up by the next contender wanting to insert their point, and then it just becomes a shouting match. The loudest one gets the attention, and whoever stops first loses, and it's just a game of verbal chicken, and the audience has no space to think or consider. It's just a shouting match. Politics at its worst. Anyway. So from what I gather, Bacon was interested in piercing the veil to see the real animal behind the human face, the one given away by unguarded looks in situations and places of least restraint, where pretense, sophisticated virtue signalling and posturing was absent. So his observations were of people collapsed in drink, twisted in fear, battered and bruised from abuse, or those just made poor at the wheel of a roulette table. Raw emotion, raw experience, things that can't be hidden. Just an observer then. And while asking good questions gets good answers and insights, we need to be very careful with the valence of those questions and to avoid guiding the witness, as it were, by not asking those leading questions. So have a quick peek in the Facebook group on the question disclosure model. Reveals the questions we ask, reveal information, questions we ask, reveal our own intentions. So there's a certain way to ask questions to get honest answers and not lead the witness. Bacon was reluctant to provide biographical information, I think for this reason. He didn't want to pollute the investigation or the pursuit into human nature. He wanted to be an impartial observer, neutral. And having a reputation that precedes you makes this very difficult. It puts people on guard. And then you have to wonder, are you experiencing the real person or the response of a person who's responding to a facade or a straw man of who they think you are? And we're back to that Alan Watts thing again, of I think you are who I think you are, that I think I am, or something like that. So it's present in the zeitgeist at the moment. I've noticed this. That recent interview by Andrew Neil, the childish snowflake interviewee, I shan't mention his name, made an accusation about the political leaning of the questioner, and he got it 180 degrees wrong. You know, when someone asks questions, to then accuse them of being on the political left and having an agenda, straight away goes for the big divide, so that it then invalidates any questions that may be asked. And if the questions are invalidated, then there's no reason to give answers. But then, if that's the case, why go on the show at all? Just for popularity, just to get in people's faces, just to be the one shouting the loudest. Yeah, back to shouting matches. Intelligentsia, is it? Yeah, anyway. So it struck me too that while money came to him eventually, rather than hoard it, he would spend it on finding a new depth of an experience, either in drink or gambling or other. So there was always this tension, the unanswered question, a curiosity, a search for threads, I think, the essence. It's kind of tempting to do that, I guess, but I've slowly come to realise that it's a complex system, it's an emergent phenomenon. There's not one thing, there's not one strand, there's not an essence, there's not a thread. It's so interwoven it's impossible to segregate. It's like peeling back layers of the onion. Eventually you'll get to nothing. There's no essence, as it were. There's no ether. And even if there was, the starting conditions are never the same anyway. So I think there's a field of study known as cybernetics that was just getting started around Bacon's time, and back then wasn't as well understood as it is today. So there was a pursuit of this kind of disintegration and a reductionism to essence. I mean, we all have 2 eyes, 2 ears and a nose, but how are they different between us? What's the difference that makes the difference? Again, cybernetics, and back to Alfred Korzybski. So perhaps for effect or as a distractor, Bacon claimed his paintings were done while drunk or hungover, or maybe this way was his way of deflecting questions about his process or his subject matter selection or his influence or what the meanings were. If he just said, I did it while I was drunk, people seem to accept that, and then there's no rhyme or reason to be analysed, no meaning to be critiqued. It's just, it is what it is. Thoughts emanating cliché. I imagine also that the same old questions get a bit, boring. And if there was one thing I learned from reading about Bacon, it was just don't bore people. And I'm sure being asked the same question over and over drives you nuts. Life is so meaningless, we might as well make it extraordinary, he would often say. And I can't think of anything more boring than giving the same answers to the same old low-quality questions. But saying that just rattles people, puts people on the defensive when you say, that's a boring question, why don't you ask me a question worth asking? Really puts people on the spot. And often, what is the one insightful question? We're back to finding the essence again. So it's perhaps best just to say I was drunk. And it's even better if that's the truth. So we better have another one. Cheers. Just to make sure. Also, he had a kind of compulsion to push his luck to the limits. I think I mentioned the plant room in the previous audio, didn't I? Where I was on a job when I was young, and these, we were in the plant room, and the lifts that are hoisted and lowered by cables run over a pulley system at the top, and there is a kind of guard around it, but you can easily get over it when you're working close to it. It's within reach. And you look at where the cable meets this big wheel, and there's no doubt that if the lift activated whilst you had your fingers in there, you wouldn't have any fingers anymore. But the temptation, will I get away with it? If I do it, maybe I'll be lucky. And you got to test it, and it's really bizarre because there's no upside to it. It's just all downside risk. Yet it's almost a compulsion about it. Can I get away with it? But anyway, yeah, it's weird. He seemed to use his money to control people, but not in a kind of negative way, but in a sort of service sort of way, tipping waitresses properly and tipping people for convenience and for service, heavy tipping. And I wonder also if this was a test too, and to see just how far he could push it, to see how far he could push the obsequiousness of people, to see if there's a point at which they would stop accepting tips because it became obscene. Again, finding people's limits and the extremes of their pretense at the absurdity of the situation. Just how far could it get you? How far? Where is the limits? If it's anything to go by, that there are no limits. It's never enough. How far could it go? Just the same as that rich bitch throwing a poodle from the heights of a hotel room just to see if she could. Give us something to talk about. Relieve the boredom. But these things can't be faked either. There's a perpetual commitment to this kind of lifestyle. It is the lifestyle. It kind of filters out the wannabes and weekend warriors. It's a weird thing to say, but I've kind of seen it around London. People throwing money around. It's virtue signaling, but they're really, really rich. They don't tip the hotel staff. They buy the frigging hotel. But there is a kind of sad sense that does come through. I mean, Bacon wasn't rich, not really, really rich. I mean, he got wealthy at the end. But what comes through is a sense of the boredom that can come when you've explored, travelled, seen it all, done it all. And after a while, one place looks the same as another. I guess the interior of one Gulfstream G650 looks the same as the next. The sensitivity to discern the difference of pinnacle experiences surely must get tiresome, and having travelled a bit, there is a frustration, an antagonism that a large section of the populace is just repeating whispers of the zeitgeist. It's the same old rhetoric, mostly what's fashionable to say, reduced to a meme that outlives its progenitors and survives long after it should. There's always someone who hasn't seen that witty saying, but that doesn't mean to say that it's new on every reading. It is still old, but you just can't tell them. And at the risk of irony, as Hegel said, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. But our histories are personal, and there's always that first-time experience, the first kiss. You can still remember it, I'm sure, the first lovemaking, the first adrenaline rush, or the first near-death experience, the first leap that seemed impossible, the first time on stage, the first hit of cocaine. The list is endless, but it seems to me, as we get older, the chemical cocktails do mellow. Those receptor sites do habituate. The curse of humanity is we seek that rush, that bond, perhaps even a return to innocence, or the youth of former years. It's friggin' tragic, this getting old shit, but it's the path to wisdom. It's also said to be independent of public opinion is the first formal conditioning of achieving anything great. I think Hegel also said genuine tragedies in the world are not conflicts between right or wrong, they are conflicts between two rights. Do it because you want to, not because of duty or compulsion. But Bacon would also provide experiences for people. And in a way, he'd use those experiences, those situations, contrived or constructed, to learn about people, to see how they reacted to something new for the first time, to get a raw glimpse into pure emotion before those thoughts can be rationalised, reasoned, justified into linguistic representation. Bacon admired Giacometti's attitude of starting again every day, not relying on past achievement. I think this is that sense of drifting. As John Truby pointed out in his book, Anatomy of a Story, there are many ways to experience a story. There's many ways to drift. Linear implies a start, middle, and a vector towards the end, ordered. Where are you heading? What do you focus on? Meandering. Move from here to there with no real purpose, just experiencing it for the sake of it. What do you long for? What are the recurring themes in your life? Spiraling. Consider the reaffirming process of the optimist. If their actions fail, they react. The pessimist will tend to work harder on managing the pain of failure than to take action. So, are you in or are you out? What is an important aspect of your life? What have you not been doing for the last 10 years? Branching, something Buffett talks about actually. This installation of self-similar organisations on different levels. You know, he always saw his subordinates as owners, and he would motivate them and allocate resource. And then those owners would install owners kind of below them in the chain of command, if you like, and they would then motivate them and allocate resource. So there's a self-similar structure on different scales. So what seeds are you planting today? What fingers do you have in other pies? And then there's kind of the explosive model, all at once, multiple paths that extend simultaneously. So where in life do you make spontaneous decisions? And Bacon would say that only after starting is the direction clearer. So he was fascinated by Giacometti and how he would take forms to the edge of essence and be the maker of images. He sought out conflict, contradictions, and the extremes of difference, hypocrisy, incongruence. A fabulous book on neuroscience puts forward the notion that the mind isn't just one unit, but many different parts, not necessarily acting in unison, often in conflict, and not even in a coherent way. Time horizons, contexts, and needs change, and the priorities of each change according to context and time horizons. You know, something's important today, something's important next month, something's important over the next 10 years, and they're all in conflict. So it kind of seems a folly to try and understand why. You'd probably have to live that person's life to find out. But even then, the starting conditions aren't the same. And maybe that's what biographies are, an expression of values and how they change over the person's time horizon, much like the inner light, the record of how innovation was done. And it seems recently retired CEOs of large corporations write the book as their legacy. Maybe it's a decompression exercise or a breadcrumb trail for others to follow, but as Jack Welch, or was it Peter Drucker said, success obsoletes the behaviour that delivered it. So in a sad way, it seems to me these are our only choices, obsolescence or extinction. Pick one. Nevertheless, Bacon didn't believe in an afterlife, but he did believe that art could give meaning between the brief interlude of birth and death. As on a personal note, I've settled to realise that the search for meaning doesn't mean that one is to be found. or that there is even a meaning to be found. The focus is on the search. I missed this. I was always looking for the meaning. It's preposterous, really, but if anything, I realise meaning is synonymous with thinking. To me, this is way more transparent. It becomes a search for thinking. In a sense, that is real and achievable, since at least it's definable. What the fuck is meaning anyway? Surely that's kind of a reification error. Some kind of abstract notion. It's an emergent phenomena. We pretend it's real, but is it? So it's not even about the conclusion, it's about thinking. Not necessarily about conclusion, there isn't one. So a new thought from introspective thinking can itself be thought about, sliced and diced, and a new meaning revealed. It seems we're kind of just this blob of thoughts, a mere speck in the dust of time. In some way, these can be recorded in many forms. Bacon, it seemed, wanted the consumer of his art, the viewer, the absorber of his works, to put it crassly, to have that raw, unfiltered impact without the perversion of thoughts or meaning or interpretations ruining the experience. He just wanted them to have an experience, a new experience, quite a tall order. This seems something consistent across the greats. It seems to be a recurring and common theme. So I suppose it makes sense. When you're young, typically no real world experience, and so one must draw on external experiences and references, and what's more evocative or loaded with symbolic representation than crucifixions? I'm sure Bacon would have seen the irony and the parallel our lives run, don't you think? Humans, largely symbolic, and hence both creators and consumers of culture. Interesting to know what happens when one of these creatures encounters a similar frail creature who has, in their mind, different but not so dissimilar combinations of symbolic systems and contexts. You'd think we'd appreciate that. But as I say, frail, threatened, and it seems neurotic and quick to react with violence. And I think Bacon was onto it, A new way of thinking. Only by expressing the chaos and emotion that's inside us, the artist held, was there any chance of coming to terms with the confusion? Yeah, he comes right out and says it. And this is congruent with a non-violent communication model. Our feelings are a gauge as to whether our needs are being met. And if our feelings are not being met, we feel bad. Frustration, anger, denial creep in. And this kind of goes back to the concept of eudaimonia. To see the beauty in art that is missing in us, to see a need we have that perhaps we could not express in words. Feelings are complicated, as are emotions. It seems to be a lost skill. We've kind of twisted our language so much that we confuse judgments and diagnosis with emotions. And I think this is what Bacon was trying to get over, to insist the viewer had an emotional experience, to have a feeling, and to avoid the labels of judgment. Too often we misappropriate judgment for feeling. When we ask somebody who's a bit down perhaps, how they feel, what's the response that we normally get? I'm depressed. Well, that's the diagnosis and the judgment. The feeling is, I feel sad. But instead we get a diagnosis when we ask for a feeling. So we kind of lived in this detached and in denial. It's kind of weird. While I think about it, and as we age and get more rounded, I suspect that while our search for meaning or experience intensifies, effects of diminishing returns kick in. Those early ketotic effects, deep context anchors are merely confirmed. So we really only see what we're looking for, or we only see what we're expecting to see. And it takes a lot to shift those gestalts of 30 or 40 years, and by that time, it's not easy to confirm to oneself or to admit that the last 50 years of the whole of their life has been a lie. I mean, that is a feeling in of itself. It's kind of shock, it's horror, it's suddenly a naked vulnerability that, shit, 50, 60 years old, you've got to start all over again and you don't really know what's real anymore. But it seems that too often we conflate feelings and diagnosis. Perhaps that's too harsh. Perhaps asking someone how they feel is really a poor quality question. How can we seriously expect someone to sum that up in just a few words? Myself, I sometimes struggle to respond seriously to such a question, and then I wonder if that's the point, that it is actually a cursory payment to lip service and a courtesy to feign actual interest, in which case I'm not so shallow that I need that kind of hollow interest. In fact, I'd rather you just didn't ask, unless you really are asking and really do want to know. And the answer is obvious. I feel like everyone else, pissed off, downtrodden, had life beaten out of me, problems with money, problems with relationships, general apathy and ever-growing futility as the age counter inexorably increases at a seemingly increasing rate. Same as you. Thanks for asking. So why are you asking? To make yourself feel better? Go fuck yourself then. I'd rather you just not ask. Unless you really do have solutions to those problems. Do you? It is problematic, which is to say there are no apparent answers to the big questions, and even if there was, those come with new sets of problems. In other words, just what part of the elephant are we examining? So definitions, inherently limiting. They frame a static picture of something that is better perceived in movement, and they portray a frozen, statutory something that is better understood as a process. They succumb too often to the intellectual's temptation to take pragmatic statements as constitutive and to identify some concept more with what is said than what it did. It explains what it is and not how it got to be here or even whence it came, and especially negates a change over time due to forces, which is probably the larger part of the story. Just recently had an online argument with somebody who was stuck in their ways about what marriage is and was quoting some 1755 definition from some federal thing. I mean, it wasn't even Black Law's first edition. Interestingly enough, the 5th edition, Black's Law, still says marriage is defined as that between a man and a woman. But of course, things move on, things change. There are forces at work. This is the point. The quest for the perfect definition by reduction to one ever more finely honed phrase seems to shut off questions about the origins and course of development rather than open up those conversations. It's a bit like observing Madame Tussauds waxworks instead of living people or birds mounted in a glass case instead of alive and in their habitat. Plastic flowers all over again. Kind of goes back to Euclid's geometry covered in the logistics episode. A point, a line, surface, 3D object. What's our utility or application? Which direction, which vector, where did we start from, where are we going, and how do we expand? Is it better to say that a line is a line, or that here's a sequence of points that are spaced so closely together as to have no space between them, and those points are actually made of no dimension at all? Or is it better to say, yeah, it's a line? So I reckon this is what Bacon was conveying when he thought about the plastic flowers in the homes of the rich. All that money, and they opted for the fakes, the facades, the imposters, rather than the real thing. Why? It's fun to speculate about lower long-term costs over variety, I suppose, longevity over superficiality, maintenance over appearances, or is it a control thing? Who knows, each to their own, I guess. It's many value systems being played out in the mind of the homeowner. Perhaps not even consciously, or maybe it was a convincing salesperson that manipulated their attention, manipulated their values and merits to a seemingly inevitable and clear-cut decision. Bacon reaffirms the point, though. The flowers die, the real ones. That's the point. So perhaps when someone asks me how I am next time, I shall simply say dying. I shall gauge the look of my inquirer by their response. Will they celebrate or have a look of fear in their eye that they too are not exempt, as they are reminded of their mortality? Now it makes sense that Bacon wanted no celebration at his memorial service. It's one of those sentimental backward things that humans do. We celebrate a life of someone who's no longer with us. Pity we never had the presence of mind to celebrate while they were still alive, while we were with them. Yeah, I get it. There is a requirement for mourning and grief and eventually working through that kind of Kubler-Ross process in our own way, and perhaps it's never fully reconciled. Life is suffering and all that. Additionally, asking someone how they are seems another backward tradition. Bacon seemed to have reversed this too. Instead of asking about past feelings, here, have a look at this masterpiece and have a new feeling you've never had before. Just say thanks. But I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have presumed so much in those statements. But I think that's perhaps what he was going after. Maybe not even for his audience, but certainly for himself, to excite himself. And the crook seems to come to terms with being okay at living in confusion. I mean, life is, and it is sometimes overwhelming. Maybe this is the point of it all, the clash of colour. The very pigment of his paintings reenacts a struggle, and it's a struggle that goes deep. It's not just to convey, or perhaps even for Bacon to excite himself. I guess those are the waypoints, but it seems to me, in my kind of naivete about all this, that the artist must also consider feelings and emotions about things that are abstract and kind of non-existent in real life, kind of, fabled unicorns kind of things. And I think he also respected the viewer, and I think this is maybe why he named some of his paintings painting. What else could they be labelled? Anything else would be maybe disingenuous, or worse, a lie. It is what it is, and I'm sure he would know that his audience would recognise that. Well, of course it's a painting. And it works the other way too for the newbie. Why is it called a painting? Why couldn't the artist think up a good name? Aha, good question, gotcha. Even his partner of the time, perhaps less sophisticated, was saying, company of high society, of Bacon's paintings, I think they're horrible. Bacon, I'm sure, got a kick out of that. It overturned the sophisticated high society, as his boyfriend would give a dismissive snort during an in-depth discussion on aesthetics. Seems to me, while there may be merit in that, it's missing the substance, and it seems akin to what's happening in kind of bumper sticker politics. We look to blame or point the finger or label people fascists or commies, lefties, Republicans, or right-wing nut jobs, or whatever. Who's right, who's wrong, to a degree. That's all aesthetics. It's a distraction. It's about the colour of your bumper sticker, an argument of semantics. Should we call them detention centres or concentration camps? Who should we follow, donkeys or elephants? Well, the longer that discussion goes on, the more people will die and suffer unnecessarily. So again, are we talking about the label? What the label is, or the thing itself? What the thing itself does? Mention selection and idolatry. The letter of the law, and the spirit, as it were. The classification, as compared to the intention. Icons and symbols often a distraction, a deep anchor that forgives the most reprehensible behaviours, seasoned with a no true Scotsman fallacy. Again, in my naivety, for me this is what abstract art does. It kind of raises within us these introspective questions, shakes up our internal boundaries about things a bit, loosens our model of the world, gets us to question things, think about things, reevaluate beliefs we held since children but have not reevaluated with the mind and sophistication of an adult, perhaps even to indulge in a little bit of existential horror. Side note, should we recognise things by their names, labels, icons, or by what they are and what they do? The representation is mistaken as one of its own denotata. There's a difference between pointing to a picture of a tree and saying, look, tree, and pointing to an actual tree and saying, look, tree. I feel I shouldn't have to point this out, but it seems this kind of thing, this misclassification is rife on the internet. Or, anyway, what it is. Not because people are making these category errors, but I think they're projecting a kind of anxiety or assuming that their interlocutor has made these mistakes. They're assuming that their arguing counterparty is that unsophisticated. And sorry, dear listener, it's what I'm doing to you right now. Labouring the point. A crass example here is a representation of a cat. Actually, here is a representation of two things. But what? Cats are not 35 stories tall. While the morphology is similar to that of a cat, cats are not 200 feet tall. That describes something else, as yet unseen. Or maybe it is true to say that this is a representation of, whatever that means, a cat, and it's the inferred building that's only 8 inches tall, which does not describe a skyscraper. So what exactly are we looking at? Simulacra, and Bacon's paintings are dripping with this. A search for a reference point. It's there somewhere, a kind of ever-present entity, not directly represented, but something to which variation can be detected. Like Waitskin's chess, we learn the pieces, then the moves, then the interactions, and then the space between them, the network, and eventually we learn to appreciate the dance, the emergent phenomena. And like grandmasters, we don't see pieces anymore, not figures, not drawings, not lines, not contours, but patterns in the mind of the counterparty. Very intimate affair. Having said that, an amusing thought came to mind. While we can and often do refer to pictures of things as the things themselves, look, a tree, we let it slide. We know it's a picture of a tree, but the linguistics and symbols of what we think of as trees are evoked. So, quick thought of experiment. Clear your mind. I'm going to say a word, and just note what comes to mind. Ready? Elephant. Well, what else would it be? Maybe you thought of a blue one or a pink one. Who knows? So, of all the contexts, the mental images and symbols that were evoked, did you think or see in your mind's eye a picture or painting of an elephant, or did you imagine the real thing? Was it moving or still? And if it was moving, was it a creation of imagination, or were you recalling a clip that you'd seen from National Geographic or something, as shown on a screen of rapidly changing coloured dots? And did you conjure up an image, a symbol, or did you imagine what an elephant does? The context and the setting, or was it just an abstract form? Yeah, okay, it's a lot more work to do, and it's much easier just to bring to mind a simplistic representation. So, kind of trying to make the point that labels are easy to bring up, and whether someone then agrees with your label creates a binary polarization that they either agree or they disagree and can be categorized accordingly. Much more in depth, much more involved, much more taxing to say, okay, instead of saying what good or bad is that, what do they do in practice? What does it enable? Where does it lead? What's the intention? How do we know when we get there? Much harder things to do. So, back to current affairs, and out of the blue, if I asked you to imagine fascism, do you get a stereotype of symbols, icons, and dress codes, or do you think about what it is and what it does? And the problem with matching on symbols is that it's basically a red herring. All the time, we get alert to the symbology, we miss what it is and what it does, and we miss it, whilst all the time it's growing around us. We might even try to deny it because we're not raising our right hand, we're not wearing a swastika or wearing jackboots, and no one's goose-stepping. But that's what we're looking for, and we miss the military parades, the idolising of leaders, the rising in nationalism. Too focused on the symbols, too focused on the bumper stickers. Yeah, so, again, bumper sticker politics. Mine's red, yours is blue, and therefore one of us has the wrong colour. This is a classic problem of denotation and selection, and it's one that children sort out pretty quick. A child knows that a representation of an instance is not the thing itself, but even a child knows enough flexibility of mind to know that it's a facsimile, a metaphor, to be taken literally as an article of faith. Yeah, so it's just an observation as well. It's kind of like I don't know whether it's a bystander effect or an anti-bystander effect. You know, the bystander effect is where you got all these people in a room doing a survey or something and smoke breaks out in the corner, and if you were there alone, you'd leave the room, but because no one else is reacting, you think, well, they must know something I don't, maybe it's a test, or maybe this normally happens. You find all sorts of reasons to justify why you shouldn't leave the room because no one else is leaving the room. I see this on online forums, mentioned something now that's charged, and no one comments. Why has no one else commented? That's obviously bait. There must be a good reason not to challenge that. Is it because the people don't know, or they accept it, or they agree with it? How will I be classified if I pile into that? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. But this is how it works. I think I even heard it said that you shouldn't speak out and say that the current state of affairs is fascist, because that's such an outlandish thing to say. The state will come and arrest you and put you in jail, which is exactly what a fascist regime would do. Anyway, stereotypes are formed, kurtotic effects take hold, and slowly and gradually and unknowingly we all of a sudden have a cult. It might be interesting to cover Hassan's bite model of cults. Suffice to say that a cult has one of its main purposes as to grow. We mentioned before the implosion of the Manson family cult, and like a Ponzi scheme, it needs more recruits to survive to offset the attrition rate. But as a cult leader, you can't come right out and say, hey, join our cult. It puts people on the defensive. Nah, you got to use coded language, something we mentioned in the previous video. Other tactics include dog whistles and sea lining. So, for example, the cult or special interest group might only want a particular kind of membership, but you can't just come out and say it. So you might use phrases like, no singles over 30, meaning no gays, for example, coded language. Case in point, in the news a couple of weeks ago, he comes from a good family, meaning white and rich, so it's okay to rape girls. The triple brackets used on Twitter, the so-called triple bracket echo, has a specific meaning. Code 88, the 14 words, or the combo 1488. CWB. Of course, when you point it out, it becomes problematic. Oh, John, you're just seeing it everywhere because you go out looking for it. It's your confirmation bias. But this is the purpose of coded language. It provides a sneaky cover of plausible deniability. Speaking of which, C-lining is the kind of dirtiest. I really detest C-lining. So while you may run a YouTube channel and choose to remove or delete bigoted or incitements to do harm, the C-liner will say that censoring is unconstitutional or that it's not fair. You have a big audience and they don't. And if the points are so clearly or easily refuted, then you should use your platform to debunk these C-liners with their bigoted comments. That is to say, you should put their bigoted comments on there and allow them to stand and be criticised if they can be. Yeah, at first glance it seems fair, but it isn't. It's done in bad faith to engage in a debate, to talk about things that don't need to be talked about anymore. The jury's decided long ago. I remember this with creationism. You know, when creationism got kicked out of school, they rebranded it intelligent design, and then that got kicked out as well. And then their mantra became teach the controversy, teach both sides of the story. Well, no, there is only one side of the story, and to then imply that there's two sides, and it just becomes a constant drain on resources. Constantly have to refute things that have been refuted 1,000 times before, and again and again, and what again and again. And again and again. When exactly will they accept that they're on the losing side, that evidence does not support their claim? Oh, we've got to prove it again. One more time, is it? Yeah, so I rip on flat earthers perhaps more than I should, because whilst it's innocuous, the prototypic behaviour is worth examining, the kind of schizotypy we've talked about before. Yeah, so with the things that are coming, we've got to grow up quick, get sophisticated, and put down the toys. And for me, this increases my appreciation of artists and comedians. It's easy to spot the surface level stuff. Name-calling, virtue signalling, arguing about semantics. Anyone can do that. It takes a bit of thought, though, and dedication to go beyond the obvious to the next level kind of thing. I mean, I know that's kind of one of those vague statements in itself and a surface level statement to make. But this is why we can get lost in the artworks of the greats. Not just the painters and the sculptors, but the comedians too, the ones who do call it out, but so subtly and in a way that you can't not think about it. It's presented in a way that can't easily be dismissed as, oh yeah, another paranoid conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat wearing loon. So yeah, more comedians, more artists, travel more, deviate. And as things like AI automate more jobs, I think we're going to either need or see more comedians and artists. And in some kind of strange way, just reading background information on fascism, the precursor seems to be a rejection of the arts and a rejection of the intellectuals. And I just wonder if it's going to be one of the great saving graces of contemporary society, that AI is going to take all these jobs, so it's going to force us to be more artistic and force us to be more intellectual because there's nothing else to do, and that just might be the saving grace. So I don't know, as a barometer, I mean, what's your feeling on this? Here's a question just throwing it out there. What's your sense on the global attitude towards the arts, towards comedians and intellectuals at the moment? But it does kind of reach to Bacon, and his imagery obviously stirs up contemplation about power, draped in monstrous and depraved colours of red and black hues, and on occasion interrupted with a swastika. Yeah, context. I know it was just after the war and, you know, in some senses still in the minds of the people of the time. Again, it's the Cheshire Cat smile, but without the cat, to paint the scream more than the horror. that bit is left to us to fill in. In this way, we have a visceral experience. We don't see the horror. We have to make it. It puts the locus of control with us. Conversely, shifting the locus of control to external allows others to dictate to us, to tell us, to lead us. Something we talked about in the mindset videos, and it's insidious. So once locus of control has been shifted from internal to external, then steering action by use of slogans and propaganda is so much easier. MAGA, it's not even a catchphrase anymore, it's just 4 letters. Anyway, to get back on track, I do wander too much. One of Bacon's partners, his lover, I think his earlier one, tried to emulate his hero, perhaps for approval, perhaps because it gave him fame and attention, but he didn't have the money, the charm, the insight, or foundations to pull off the act, so it was always going to be hollow and ended predictably. The folly of youth and idols. It's a hard one to accept. The youth, we, you, me, do not have the money of the rich, don't have the talents of the talented, nor the looks of the really good looking, which happen to coincide with society's latest arbitrary concepts of what handsome or good looking actually is, over which we have no control anyway. Well, actually, there are movements about particular body shape acceptance. We're already getting so far off topic here. Let's try and get back on track. Most importantly, though, the big one, we do not have power. All these things elusive, and I suspect more likely to be projected onto the idol than the idol actually has. It's a two-way thing where both parties participate in the delusion. I think we covered this last time. Live and let live, Bacon would say, but do no harm. But we don't have visibility over that too much. But with technology, it seems things are changing. We do now have sight over the far-reaching implications and consequences of our actions. Though, conveniently, willful ignorance still persists. I did a 14-part video series on willful ignorance in the Facebook group. Interesting stuff. Seems though Bacon had more than a tinge of guilt over the deaths of his lovers, needs, resources and choices. I think this is attributed to his foresight of those circumstances and, in retrospect, the possibility of averting those dire consequences existed, and perhaps he might admit he didn't want to pay that price, or he didn't want to sacrifice. Somehow these choices that need to be made are delayed or pushed back, hopefully to less intense times in the future. There's never a good time to deal with a crisis, but as we push them back, eventually they reach a breaking point and they do present themselves with full intensity at the worst possible time. So we can never see into the future. However, consequences are unavoidable. Maybe decisions are avoidable, but even there are consequences. So it seems as Bacon got busy with his pinnacle achievements, those closest needed him the mostest at those times, but could not have him. Again, the Furies enacting vengeance and retribution wrapped around jealousy. It seemed to Bacon as they were ever present. It also seemed that Bacon had established a bit of his own power structure, and in a perverse way, his lovers didn't give him what he wanted so much, so he could give them what they wanted. But in a sort of dysfunctional way, they gave him exactly what he didn't want, and that excited him, I guess. Or maybe there was a compulsion to accept it anyway. It's not like back in the day one could go to the police and complain about the abuses from one's illegal homosexual partner. He was famous, and if word got out that Bacon shopped his lovers, well, that's a price paid by the rich and famous, often overlooked by those who desire it so much. But power. Having politicians and lawyers and judges in one's back pocket, anything becomes possible. Nay, accepted, nay, cheered on. There seems to be a bit of a delusion about it that, we egg on the billionaire because whilst billionaires exist, it means that there is a remote possibility that we could be one, but if we change the laws and redistribute wealth and make it so that billionaires just can never get to that state of affairs, then we deny ourselves the chance, impossible and improbable as it seems. But the price for keeping that hope alive is very, very high. Bacon drifted though, talked with doctors and scientists, kept technical and medical literature around the swamp, which is how he referred to his studio. The floor littered with torn pages from expensive books and journals, strewn with photographs, a compost from which inspiration would come. His attitude to life, which deepened with time but did not alter, was based on an unyielding conviction of its futility. We come from nothing and go to nothing, was his most constant refrain, and the bedrock of his belief. Life meant nothing, a spasm of consciousness between two voids. Yeah, a spasm. And spasms featured heavily in his works. Life is absurd. Yet his nervous system was filled with optimism, which made it even more absurd, meaningless yet exciting. Maybe that was his spasm. And his attitude was that something marvellous is always about to happen. He said he never needed holidays, as his whole life was a holiday. Nice. And only too much is enough. This was not gluttony, but exceeding limits of control. Again, a paradox. Just how far can you go while being in control of the uncontrolled? Or how uncontrolled can your control be? A kind of distance of self-choice. Was it really my choice, or am I being influenced? Neuroscience got some fascinating insights into this. I think we covered it in the rubbernecking video. The kind of what's described as precognition, that there's an unconscious decision before the kind of conscious part of you actually becomes aware. So then all sorts of philosophical questions get raised about, do you really have willpower? Who's in control anyway? Is it really my choice? Who's doing the decision making? All that kind of stuff. And in regard to the stealthy onslaught of age, he would comment that people would go with him. As long as they were entertained, they would come back. But once he told them your age, he said they would just be disgusted. He didn't say with themselves or disgusted with him. There it is, he would say. It's tragic to go on desiring when one's old. Yeah, that's quite profound. Kind of torn on that one too. Some say to have those adventures and unique experiences when you're young. Bacon seems to agree. If you're old, been saving yourself, by the time you're really ready, no one wants to play, and you're alone with burning desires and no one to share or play with. It's friggin' tragic. It seems there is something to be said for establishing community and networks now, today, not for today, but for 15 years or 20 years from now. And I'm told, I'm starting to see, that those years will whip by so fast. Art is a question of going too far. Bacon explained that other art or inspirations or influences converged for him. I guess it's kind of synthesis. Success was linked to the degree of risk involved. The arrangement of the elements in his work, some of them edgy considering World War II was still fresh in people's minds, and to use Third Reich symbolism crossed with bullfighting was a risk. Would the viewer get it? Would they stop long enough to see the unasked question? Would it create just enough tension? Would it raise the question in the viewer? Would it keep them coming back for more without being disgusted first? This seems to be a really tricky task to pull off. To isolate the figures in his drawings via technique so that they avoid being illustrative or part of a narrative, but not so abstracted as to be lost foam. Then there's pushing people too far, stretching the gap too wide, when teasing becomes antagonizing and when antagonizing people becomes sport, just like putting the fingers between a lift cable and its wheel just to see if you can get away with it, just like abusing a lover to see how far the relationship can be pushed before it breaks, a kind of sick way of finding out what will be tolerated as a measure of how much the other party either needs or loves or values that relationship. I wonder if the trick here is to speak up, take a risk, be bold and be clear about how much you value the relationship before the other party gets the outrageous idea to issue some kind of test. No one likes to be tested, evaluated, or judged, and as we discovered with Dweck, once a relationship gets to the stage of contempt, seldom is there a way back. All downside risk, no upside, but the compulsion is there. But why? I don't know, sometimes maybe it's resentment or seeking attention or validation, and because of the lack of that or the perceived loss of that thing, where you seek to take it back. Retribution, vengeance, righteous indignation. We've covered these in previous videos. But there is some interesting commentary to be made around this about how different cultures took different amounts of time to take to Bacon's paintings. And I recall years and years ago reading one of Gladwell's books. Appropriately enough, I think it was called Outliers. And in that book, Gladwell talked about Hofstede's dimensions, which describes the effects of a society's culture on the values of its members and how these values relate to behaviour. Hofstede's model describes things such as the power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, the uncertainty avoidance, masculinity versus femininity, long-term orientation versus short-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. And as a side note, in business, it's commonly agreed that communication is one of the primary concerns. So for professionals who work internationally, people who interact daily with other people from different countries within even their own company or organisation, Hofstede's model gives insight into other cultures. One of the things I find fascinating about how diplomacy works. And that seems a very dying art at the moment. So yeah, again, I think this is what Bolotto is talking about in his book, Deviate, or Travel. And Bacon did, and I suspect his drive for extremes was an exploration of these differences. But even more nuanced than that, I think he had a fantastic sensitivity and an apparatus of highly tuned awareness. And I think the more you travel, the more sensitive you become, more aware of differences, more aware of prejudice even. I remember the first time I experienced prejudice based on skin colour. It's quite unnerving. And that's kind of the point. I didn't know the cultural norms where I was. I didn't know whether saying something like this or saying something like that would make the situation better or worse. Seems Bacon was also keenly aware of self-cannibalism. Perhaps this is no surprise given the focus of his art. Innovation is hard. Self-replication and aggrandizement and cannibalism ends up being the parody of the innovation. That's easy. See most franchise films. Luckily, there are some tropes that seem endlessly fulfilling. It's also remarkable how people don't get bored with it. Actually, I'm sure they do, but there's a new crowd coming in under the last generation that is exposed to the tropes, memes, stereotypes, and so on for the very first time. The rest simply just shuffle on and find a new novelty. Rambo, The Terminator, even Rocky, and let's not mention those slasher franchise films or gore porn of the last few years. Saw, Final Destination, Human Centipede. Why? How did that make it to a third film? Kind of reminds me of the user experience in business. Coming up with a new experience to be had grabs the entire potential market. And as that market matures and habituates, only this year's new crop of prospects will find it novel, which is a much, much smaller market. The rest are satiated, and even then, this year's new to the experience joins the ranks of the satiated very quickly. And even then, new potential buyers or new potential experiences of that service go, everyone's done that, I'm too late, it's past, fad's over. Very description of the diffusion of innovation. Sometimes though, I guess you gotta chew to really get the flavours going. You know, as the saying goes, gotta give it time to marinade. To grow the perfect crystal takes a long time. Delay the gratification a bit. Go deeper. Be in service rather than seek to be served. Live in ambiguity a bit more, or maybe a bit less. Explore the masculine or the feminine a bit more or a bit less. Change your time horizons. Live this week as though you only had 10 days to live. And after that, live one day like you're going to live forever. Indulge, don't indulge. Mix it up. This is the Hofstede's indexes, obviously. So, take time to immerse and actually engage. The greats really do deserve and will reward this effort. Books, paintings, music and film stand on the shoulders of these giants. Find their inner light. So, laced with philosophy and moral dilemmas, two of my favourite films, The Counselor and Sicario. The first one, not the follow-up, Day of the Soldado. Both these films morally ambiguous. But in The Counselor, we are eventually introduced to F.A., who is actually positioned or portrayed as a kind of wise, sage business type who gives valuable life lessons on making room emotionally for the bad things that will happen to us in life, and to grieve ahead of time in an economy Few men will practice, he warns. The FA seems beyond worldly experienced, which is a bit scary. Kind of mirrors Bacon's work, and that the implications of how he got that information, how he came to those learnings, are frightening and quite horrific. One can only imagine how the dark sage not only came to learn this wisdom, but it seems he's rehearsed it so well and given this speech so many times. We get the feeling he's experienced many spasms, let's say. The attendant phantom in his words echo like the scream as painted by Bacon. What force drives it? What is the nature of this force? And what does it want? Where does it come from? How does it make decisions? It's a bit like the dark malevolent force of what we talked about last time, the superpower of a vampire. At first it seems like it's on our side, but we've mistaken its ambivalence because it's actually going for sweeter meat, and only when that runs out do we get to be in its sights. It was never on our side. It was always ambivalent, so it seems. So while comforting the counsellor, which is the premise of the film, the FA makes it explicit that while he can only offer words, there is no one to see, there is no one who can fix things. For the decisions were made long ago and the consequences are inevitable, no matter what. Business ethics and responsibility for decisions made long ago. The FA says you are the world you have created, and when you cease to exist, this world that you have created will also cease to exist. But for those with the understanding that they're living the last days of the world, death acquires a different meaning. The extinction of all reality is a concept no resignation can encompass. And it's a kind of cruel irony that a top-end lawyer, we presume, is getting counselled in such caring and compassionate way by the cartel. Like I say, there's an ambivalence. There's no smouldering rage at the bottom of it all, as Westray says in the film. It's just the nature of things. It's just what they do. There's also something so subtle in these words, in the portrayal, that when Yeffe tells the counsellor that there is no one to meet, that there's no one to negotiate with, no one to fix things. Some things just can't be undone. The course of time, cause and effect, cannot be undone. And after sharing his other-worldly advice with the counsellor, Yeffe says he needs to lie down now and take a little rest before making some more calls. And since this is in the middle of the day, we're left to guess as to why. Is this because this truth is so painful, even for Yeffe, that he too must now practice a bit of grieving for the future? Brilliant writing, worth watching just for this little interaction, and notably his closing statements about grief. Shan't spoil it, brilliant writing, definitely check out the film. And a similar speech is recited by the Merovingian character in The Matrix Reloaded. Wise, power, causality, and so on. Sadly, Bacon's partners seem to die very close to Bacon's pinnacle art moments. For example, on the day before an important exhibition with the attendant French president. Pain and pleasure wrapped up in an emotional fury. Yes, the furies visited him often. Seems tragedy was always accompanying his triumphs. I wonder if this was cruel causality at work again, and that it couldn't have happened any other way. And as he got older, more of his friends died. This happens, facts of life, but we can't help but wonder why it is that people in our lives start to die and we survive. Had we made different choices, would some of those still be with us? I've thought about this, and it seems that these thoughts are actually quite common. However, this is a kind of confirmation bias or obfuscation of the full data set, that we only see what we see in our world that is actually transparent to us. Of course we notice our friends die and we live. It just doesn't work the other way around. In that case, it would be them saying the same thing. So yeah, let that one go. Yeah, the sad part of this tale was that Bacon straddled many worlds via close friends who linked to those worlds. He had close friends that hosted parties for the rich, which he attended. Others connected him to the famous and the aristocracy, to which he was also invited and would mingle from time to time, and so on. And as these kind of connectors died out, the invitations, and in a sense his world, also died out. The FA's speech seems so close to this, it's kind of remarkable. And as for the critics, there's always going to be critics. I'll do a video perhaps one day on how to turn a critic into a teacher. But in Bacon's case, I don't know, I'm kind of divided on this. Sure, every generation will produce its genius, but perhaps like Picasso or Bacon or Beethoven or Tesla or Newton, And again, it's a kind of selection bias at work. These people became known, and we grant them a notoriety, we grant them special privilege in our minds, but they made mistakes just like you and I, and again, it's a selection bias, and perhaps they did see something that no other had until that time. But if these particular individuals hadn't, then perhaps it might just have been someone down the street or another technician in the lab that might have seen it a few weeks or months later. Anyway, the kind of myth of the solo genius. Even so, let's say it's true that every generation pops out a genius, someone who sees things or has a unique perspective. Cool, great, this is it, this is where we are, this is what we're looking at. You know, it's a bit like the kind of CEO fallacy. Warren Buffett talks about this, you know, when you put a CEO in the chair and the company turns around and suddenly has all these profits. Was it because of the actions of the CEO, or was he just happened to be sat in the chair at the time that the market conditions happened to be fortuitous? Seems also that any kind of head of state, president or prime minister who's doing, say, a 4-year term should have the first 2 years mostly attributed to their predecessor. And so there's a huge lag. So what value is the criticism that even the greats will endure? What is the purpose of making criticism of something that's just different? I think it comes back to rubbernecking all over again. And in some ways, there's always going to be someone somewhere who disagrees, or, I don't know, you know, wants to argue the semantics or wants to decide what label to attach to it and states their case. But great, all that said and done, what changes? So, where's the value? You know, the point I'm trying to make is that perhaps the greats are the greats because they see things differently, they've done things differently. And along comes a critic and says, no, you should do it this way. Well, that critic is probably saying something that everyone else would say, yet the great has done it a different way. And that's why they're great. So, yeah. But here's another thing, you know, it seems like human beings will have the same basic needs, give or take, but we all have different tactics and strategies for getting those needs met. And it seems reckless to vilify somebody who is only 95% in agreement or only 95% aligned to our values. And even there, if we do find a rare person that's so aligned with our own values, they probably have different ideas about getting that met or getting that done. That actually means that very rarely will we find somebody who has the identical set of values and an identical strategy and an identical method of getting those needs met. So by arguing over that 5%, by saying, oh, you know, you were almost there, but that 5% is going to be your downfall, you need to do it my way, and likely they'll say the same thing about us. It just creates division and enemies everywhere. Yeah, guilty, very guilty of that. Me, very guilty of that. And it's one of those kind of meta filters, you know, how do you sort information? I've realized I have a huge preference for sorting on difference. So, you know, I'd be great at quality control because I could probably find a crack in everything or a fault with everything, and I'll go a bit overboard because I don't rein it in. You know, so like when people ask me, for example, to check a bit of work or do a bit of proofreading, I'll do it and spot all the faults, and then they'll say, oh wow, thanks for that, that was really helpful, and then that spurs me on to find even more fault, and then it just gets overwhelming and ridiculous. So is it really pragmatic to fall out on that last 5% or 10%, whatever it is? Again, this seems an opportunity to place trust in the other rather than distrust. You know, again, it's like an anxiety I see online. I've certainly been guilty of it, that I see someone who's close and it's like, well, you know, I've been there, I've tried that and they're almost right, but I want to tell them that 5% that they've got wrong, and that's all I'm going to pick up on because I'm only spotting difference, I'm only recognizing difference, I'm tuned for it. You know, I don't congratulate them or engage with them on what we agree with. I'm always going to fall out on a small bit we disagree with. It's ridiculous. You know, in a sense, I'm trying to save them the anguish, but who am I to do that? Maybe I haven't got it right. Anyway, so now I'm just projecting my own shit and very highly running the risk of boring you, dear listener. Anyway, don't you find it odd that criticism is usually a commentary against a kind of benchmark of something, some ideal, some mythical abstract notion of perfection, Or is it validation seeking, that I'm smart, that I'm clever, that I've seen the difference, validate my judgment, that the person making the criticism is seeking approval from others by having that judgment validated? Or is it that they want their virtues, their perfect path certified as some kind of genius level 4D chess shit? Wow, you're so fucking clever. We're all a bit of approval junkies. Seems that this is done automatically too often, and I think it's a legacy from school, in school we were brought up for, the impressionable part of our lives, and certainly through the social modelling phase of our lives, that we were rewarded, given a tick, told how clever we are by what we could learn, what we repeated, what we thought, any idle thought that we wrote down. Oh wow, that's original. Oh wow, that's really good writing. Oh wow, come on, 10-year kids don't write that well, and the poetry is shit, and the stories aren't masterpieces yet. The teacher's there paid to care, paid to write comments, so that by the time we get into our late teens, early 20s, we go out into the big bad world, repeat the same behaviour and expect praise and adulation and green ticks and kind comments, but no one's being paid to reward our behaviour. It's a huge mismatch. So we start seeking that validation. What's gone wrong? I think it causes a bit of an anxiety in us. Also gives us bad habits. Imagine a person walking up to a stranger and saying, "Hey, I saw you from across the gym. You're so good looking." Should that person have said, "I think you're good looking"? Or should they have stated it as fact? "You are good looking." As if the person making the assessment is the final arbiter of what is beautiful or good looking, and that the other is now subject of that appraisal. Yeah, that can't be nice. And now reverse that scenario from what you probably imagined, where now it's a woman that goes up to a man and says with the same tone of voice and cheesy smile, "Hey, I saw you across the gym. You're so good looking." Does it still fit? Ugh, kind of feels awkward all of a sudden. Suddenly feels a bit creepy. Yeah, so is it a virtue signal or some attraction approval seeking? Should that appraisal or virtue, if it really is, be validated at all? Of course, this makes a little bit of a awkward social moment. Simply saying, "Oh, thanks," just encouraging them. It's the green tick all over again. It's "tell me more." That's what, it's an encouraged behaviour. That to get more reward, you have to keep on doing the behaviour to get the green ticks, just like back in school. So, bad habits. Maybe the recipient of the unsolicited appraisal might say, "Oh, just leave me alone. I'm not interested." Well, this is like the teacher giving a red cross to every wrong statement in the homework with a note that says, "See me later." And that old trigger gets fired, and then the response to the "leave me alone" tactic is usually, "Meh, you're an ugly bitch lesbo anyway" response, which just makes no sense after what was just the opening gambit. But it's just triggered automatically. It's crazy. Perhaps there's a third tactic. "Oh no, I'm not really that good looking," and that just gets the "you shouldn't put yourself down" self-esteem pep talk. Again, as though someone else is the final arbiter on what you should and should not use to drive your own self-esteem. Maybe they should use the Bacon artists rebuff. "Oh, I'm glad you think so." But these kind of impositions, which they are really kind of place an unfair double bind on the recipient, because the recipient doesn't actually owe any time or labour to explain this to the instigator. "Piss off, you creep," is usually the response, and that creates animosity, but it's not the fault of the recipient. It's actually the instigator being socially unaware or inconsiderate. But for some reason it seems to be that somehow it's justified that we can go around making these judgments about people, but it's just not seen like that. Anyway, not here to give game advice. not that you should absolutely not be taking game advice from me. Anyway, for the student, I guess, who aims to emulate, yeah, sure, criticism is critical, guidance, mentoring essential, but also invited, demanded. But for the genius, for the rock star, for the outlier, it comes with the territory. The very definition of rock star is that behaviour that a rock star does, is what a rock star is. That's what a rock star does. It's licensed to do what you want. And what a rock star wants to do is exactly what a rock star will do. So again, success, risks, going to extremes, and someone will always be there to say how that's wrong, or how they agree, or how they don't agree with it. Maybe they even have a point, but I suspect mostly they don't. And I do want to differentiate between an analysis, let's say an objective analysis on form or technique, maybe even a speculation as to intent. But that's kind of wandering now to the different thing, which is stating a subjective opinion. And I'm surprised again to learn that these differences are so often confused. You kind of see online again the critique themselves, the criticizer themselves will put up a criticism shield. In my opinion, this is only my opinion, but as though their opinion is now shielded from criticism. Seems a little bit dishonest, don't you think? And then there's just people that seem just batshit crazy. I got a cheap snigger at an evolutionary psychologist who was mocking women's football. Maybe that's not fair. He was actually mocking a straw man of supporters of women's football, which is even worse. He was going on saying about how his heroes in football were the big names we all recognise. Well, that's pretty assumptive. But, this guy, he's a chap, he's a fella, so he's going to identify with first. Growing up as a small boy, he's probably going to associate more with what men do than what women do. Or maybe playing with other boys, because back then that's what boys did, Sign of the Times and all that. So I don't know what all this is about. I hate to use the phrase, probably some cook seeking alpha approval thing. But the point is, there are women footballers who have captained their teams more than the men, won more games than any man, scored more goals and got better results on a financial budget a fraction of what the men get for their teams, with less equipment, shoddier conditions and less pay. So, what metric do we actually want to measure here for greatness? Performance, value for money, entertainment, tenacity, longevity, commitment? Or is he basing, his worship on some idolatry? I think it's kind of obvious putting it like that. So, again, how are we measuring success? Results, performance, riches, prestige, largely granted to an individual by others from some kind of rock star snowball effect. I would have thought that to an evolutionary psychologist, he would have opened this up to discussion rather than beat the straw man he constructed to protect his sacred cows of football heroes. And then he proceeded to give himself a mock self-flagellation, saying how wrong he was. Yeah, he really was. Anyway, of Bacon's work, one critic wrote, Bacon's art is, in effect, conformist. It is not with Goya or the early Einsteinian that he should be compared, but with Walt Disney. Both men make propositions about the alienated behaviour of our societies, and both in a different way persuade the viewer to accept what is. Disney makes alienated behaviour look funny and sentimental and therefore acceptable. Bacon interprets such behaviour in terms of the worst possible having already happened, and so proposes that both refusal and hope are pointless. The surprising formal similarities of their work, the way the limbs are distorted, the overall shapes of bodies, the relation of figures to background and one another, the use of neat tailor's clothes, the gesture of hands, the range of colours used, are the result of both men having complementary attitudes to the same crisis. But this critic stated that Bacon questions nothing, unravels nothing, so yeah, exactly what Bacon said all along. So, I don't know what, rock star, genius, or astute observer of the human condition, much the same as the fictional character Effie, who advised the counsellor. Disney, well, there's a fascinating subject, and the propaganda and the myths and the stories of another great. But one at a time, we might just revisit Popeye and Pluto and the myth of redemptive violence later. Another long and fascinating story. And that's the thing about current affairs as well. It's easy, to understand what's happening in contemporary faraway lands and other countries and groups, I suppose. You really got to understand what happened in those countries and groups 30, 50 or 100 years ago. So keeping up to date is the easy part. It's getting informed in the first place that's the hard part. So while this critic might seem a little bit harsh and I don't know, maybe egregious, it may well be accurate and fair commentary. And again, it's the difference between arguing about what the labels mean and where a notion or an idea has come from and where it's going, the difference between a point and a line, the difference between a line and a surface. Yeah, I've been there before. Nevertheless, Bacon was conscious of the antagonism his picture stirred up. He tended, in fact, to be more attentive to hostility than to praise, believing that, agreeable though it was, praise taught you nothing, whereas criticism might reveal shortcomings that could be worked on. Compliments, praise, insults, it's the same thing, either a judgment seeking validation or an attempt to change behaviour. There's only one critic, and that's time. And Bacon was acutely aware of that, and aware specifically that the amount of time to affirm any value would be beyond his own death. To coin a phrase I've heard recently, that in regard to current world affairs and politics and the road we're headed down is that the boomers and Gen X need to start planting seeds for future trees, and it is us that needs to plant these seeds, and it is us that shall never enjoy the shade that they will provide. Regardless, not that Bacon welcomed death. He did want to live as long as possible and was optimistic in the sense that you could never actually prepare for death. Death is nothing. We can go on living knowing something terrible will happen. While deeply aware of man's inhumanity to man, Bacon never expressed any dismay or outrage at atrocities reported in the press, which he followed closely. When I see them killing each other in Ireland or wherever, I can't say I get terribly worked up about it, he remarked. I just think, oh well, there's 10 or 20 more of them gone. He also remarked, after reading about a particularly horrific suicide in the press, well, there it is. I suppose it's a gesture. But it's a gesture you can only make once. Yeah, there's a kind of sad futility to that. Still, it should not be surprising that Bacon had a discerning mind and worked with people who could help him in business. And he spoke of Frank Lloyd, the founder of the Marlborough Gallery, that he had a good eye. It's a very rare thing, Bacon conceded, but he knows right away whether a painting has quality or not. Most people have no instinct about images, which after all are entirely to do with artifice. People generally have to be told before they begin to see anything. The critics, especially. But Frank really does have a sense about painting. And Bacon made a point of being on good terms with the gallery, the directors and the staff. Give power what it wants, so power can give you what you want. When you're young, the sea can fill you with a feeling of hope, he once said, adding regretfully. But of course, at my age, that kind of hope has been cancelled out. Yeah, hope is the last to die. Time it right. To lose hope early is an education and a curse. Bacon himself remained convinced that an artist had to go to every extreme to stretch one's sensibility through excess and suffering in order to be able to feel and communicate more. Yeah, like in the previous video where he gave the top 10 ideas about travelling, doing things differently, read a book that supports your hero, read a book that's critical of your heroes, going to groups and subcultures that you don't normally go into or you would never experience, go to the extremes. Depends how far you want to go and what you're really about, I guess. But yeah, Bacon read Nietzsche, but also Aeschylus and Shakespeare. And because Bacon lived it as well, he'd go to extremes and get a little bit provocative, but this meant that he had to learn how to do damage control with people that he upset, or by dragging them into regions that they were uncomfortable with, or led them to make bad decisions outside of the competency. So it was said that he developed this kind of capacity for damage control while it was still possible. And this capacity, these tools, obviously give exceptional self-confidence, both in day-to-day business of living and, I suppose, in metaphysical speculation. And the secret to me seems to be comfortable with asking deep questions that give insight, and to have the flexibility to be able to change your mind and be comfortable with not holding sacred beliefs. In some sense, I suppose, to become an epistovist. That is, to believe as many true things as possible and to not believe as many false things or untrue things as possible. Personally, I find that quite a lonely path. And recent personal experiences kind of confirmed it, that, when you start reading things and see the folly of the group that you were in and you whisper it into someone else's ear, oh, blimey. That's that old thing about crowds and groups and belonging and tribes and not rocking the boat, not being the outsider, not putting yourself at risk of being ostracised, so you kind of start to work against your own self-interests. And I think this is probably why, what was his name? Was it Groucho Marx? I'm sure you've heard it. I wouldn't want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member. The original MGTOW? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, my kind of commentary on Bacon here is that whilst bad things in life happen, or we even screw up or make mistakes, people are usually forgiving if we kind of own it, recognise the mistake, make an attempt at least to make amends, and it also seems to provide opportunity for something else as well, that the counterparty can even be thankful if during this process of reconciliation new insights are created, or new worlds of possibility are opened up, or new opportunities for growth. Again, see those models of storytelling. Do you spiral off of this one? Do you spiral up, spiral down? Do you implode, explode? Do you branch off? Or do you carry on down the same path? It almost seems like the nature of things, and nothing lasts forever. And nostalgia and sentiment often the demise of many a business. Again, holding on to attachment after it's long served its purpose, hoping that infinite growth will be a sustainable business model. And I think it's by asking the exceptional questions, not by imposing judgment or telling people the way that it is, but by creating a space and opportunity to ask deep questions and then shut the fuck up long enough for people to internalise it and have insight that good things can occur, a rare skill. However, more famous, and he did become more openly outspoken, not to say bitter and abusive about other artists' work. I wonder if this is because he expected them to be held to these high standards themselves, and from reading the biographies it seems as though he slashed a lot of his own work, so maybe he started a painting, realised that it was substandard and threw it out. But of course, when that painting's worth $1 million, it becomes a very hard decision to to destroy it. But here we are. Seems he's said that people always mind more what you say about their painting than their personalities, because the painting is already out, and they think that they can still work on their personalities. Yeah, that's quite funny. Yeah, I mean, like, a lot of people spend more time washing, polishing and taking care of their car than they do their own mind or body or health and fitness regime. Weird, that. And in later life he would complain that he didn't really have anyone to talk to, didn't really care for intellectuals, but what he preferred were crooks, drifters and people who ran drinking or gambling clubs. They were less boring. Again, I'm kind of picking up on this theme of like the intellectual pursuit of linguistic and semantical ordering rather than actually doing something. It's kind of the difference between what it is and what it does. Phrases like, what's unpleasant when you get to my age is that you know for certain you won't live much longer, or my life's nearly over and all the people I've been fond of are dead, cropped up more frequently in his conversations. Naturally, no one was more conscious than Bacon himself that a whole world had begun to disintegrate around him. In his earlier days he'd claimed that once youth had gone, we spend the rest of our lives watching over our own decay. He knew the vanity of people too, how they liked to be made to feel special. When people commented on his art favourably, he would say, "I'm glad you liked it." Then he'd move the conversation. The smoothie. Vanity. So this is the way not to offend while denying validation of judgment. Again, it's a clever way of pulling it back onto the interlocutor, not even in a bad way, nor a good way, but just reflecting. I've also come to have a bit of insight on this too. To me, when people make judgment claims or extol appreciation of something that is a fundamental baseline or obvious, I know they're full of shit. An example recently would be, "Hey, how are you?" And I reply with something like, in denial, pissed off, making excuses for not getting on with it. Their response is, "Well, thanks for being honest with yourself." And that's either a patronising dig or an oblique version of the self-esteem talk, or an inference that I'm not normally honest, and that in some way I'm to be congratulated like a 5-year-old child. It just creates a contempt to me for their judgment. And while I think about it, it also comes across as a bit of a disappointment on their side that I didn't say, actually, I really need your help. Let me pay you $200 a month to give me that coaching that I know you're doing, and that's really the reason why you're asking. In fact, recently I've seen it on Facebook where I've known people don't have direct relationships with each other and they're kind of in the same groups. And I'll see it hi so-and-so, how are you? And then so-and-so will respond, just put link to virus below. Meaning affiliate link or whatever. It's pretty funny. Yeah, but it's hard to recover from contempt. So I see how actually this kind of diversion is a method of getting on with people. You know, it's like where you don't talk about religion, politics or money in polite conversation. I mean, everything is money, everything is politics, some of it's religion, or at least a religious or a fixed mindset. So, you know, we've got to get into it. They're the three big ones. At least from the M.A.R.I.E model, you know, money, religion, ideology, attachment, addiction, or ego. But what I just realised is that if we remove money, religion and ideology from M.A.R.I.E, all we're left with is attachment, addictions and ego. So let's talk about those then instead, yeah? Vanity. You know, I'm attached to my virtues because my ego demands it. Yes, suddenly vanity. It makes sense. It's the only thing that's left. How else does this play out? Well, you know, this is like the example earlier of the woman on the man going across the gym to pay a compliment that they, think it's a compliment, but it's a subtle judgment. We could try the dude's response. Well, like, that's just your opinion, man. And people don't like that either, it seems. I mean, that's an oblique way of really saying you're not qualified to make value judgments on what I've devoted a lifetime to doing. You know, I spent 25, 30 years learning how to paint, and all you can say is, I like it. Well, I'm glad you like it. What else can you say? But I mean, this is the other thing as well. It's like strangers meeting. How are you? Blah, blah, blah. And opening with a judgment just seems to be the first steps down the road of contempt. So, yeah, that seems the greats kind of steer this back on track and don't fall into the trap of making judgments about people who open by making judgments, because that just limits the relationship being unjudgmental of people who are judgmental. So again, I think it sets apart the greats, provides space for growth, and it helps either naivety or stupidity or obnoxiousness, kind of gives them space to develop and grow rather than calling them, you're obnoxious, that's a bit of a judgment, don't you think? I'll have contempt for you and the conversation is going to go nowhere. It kind of kills it. So yeah, the greats provide space, ask insightful questions, open things up. Comes back to what we were saying. Did we say it already about definitions? I think we said it. How trying to tie things down to a definition narrows conversation rather than opening it up to enable things to be done. So digging a bit deeper then, going to the next level, it seems all this kind of stems from a deep-seated insecurity. You know, the positioning of oneself as the final arbiter seeks to bypass the process of learning and engagement and the possibility of being wrong, because if I'm the final arbiter, my judgment kind of has to stand if it's an opening gambit, or you're going to have to be rude and tell me not to be judgmental. And, you know, people don't like to be rude, so, you know, we get that awkward situation in the gym of the unsolicited compliment or the unsolicited judgment, and we're kind of, oh, thanks, and that's just encouraging them more, or, oh, not interested, which slaps the contempt back, which doesn't go anywhere, or the, oh, no, I'm not really, which invites the self-esteem talk, or the, I'm glad you think so. So yeah, the seeking of judgment validations, the approval junkie wanting another green tick of approval from teacher or authority or position of power. The requirement of someone to care about them, which infers that they are to be served, that they are valuable enough to have someone who cares for them or values their judgment. But, you know, works both ways, and I see it on YouTube a lot. People who do reviews put the kind of disclaimer to act as a preemptive criticism shield. This is just my opinion. Well, if it's just your opinion, then, well, man, that's just your opinion. Who cares about that? And while one is entitled to their own opinion, the assumption also seems to be that third parties are entitled to listen to it. But it gets worse when the opiner does put their opinion out there and no one listens to it, or no one wants to host it, or no one wants to platform it. We get all that sea lining. Yeah, no one's compelled to listen, and at least of all give a signal boost to opinion, which is kind of like the lowest end of value in terms of facts or evidence or data points or well-argued reasons. You know, it's just pulled out of the air, the old saying, everyone's like arseholes, everyone's got one and they all stink, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it seems the greats have got over this. They've passed over it into a place of being in service, of asking questions rather than administering judgment. I mean, I watch James Altucher on a lot of awkward podcasts, and because the host starts to make judgments or starts to ask piss poor questions about what's your favourite colour or what pet do you like, which is really low quality questions, Altucher takes over and starts asking high quality questions. And for me, Bacon and his work ask questions, provide space and time for introspection, to have a moment of existential investigation, even a metacognition. And while maybe it's in an aggressive or, explicit or graphic way, it's certainly non-judgmental. It's a framework for self-discovery, and Bacon's work is prompting us to come up with our own good questions. But at the same time, he's, at that level of, for lack of a better word, greatness, that he does it while not boring people. It's an excitement, it's an arousal. It's to have a sensation and have a new experience whilst either prompted by or as a consequence of the questions that it raises. Brilliant. He even said, "Things are not shocking if they have not been put into a memorable form. Otherwise, it's just blood splattered against a wall. In the end, if you see it 2 or 3 times, it's no longer shocking. It must be a form that has more than the implication of blood splashed against a wall. It's when it has much wider implications. It's something which reverberates within your psyche. It disturbs the whole life cycle within a person. It affects the atmosphere in which you live. Most of what is called art, your eyes just flow over. It may be charming or nice, but it doesn't change you." Exactly. And for me, this is like the hidden depths of films like Sicario or The Counselor, or even Ex Machina. Even Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, all be a bit in your face and a bit obvious. It's a good reminder. The Matrix, sure, yeah, based on the book Simulacra and Simulation. But it's the moralistically ambiguous ones I like, where there is no right answer. There's no preaching in the villains and the heroes are. The roles could be reversed, and some of the Batman films, the Dark Knight Rises, kind of explored those themes. But in the end, there was a hero. The audience was left with a resolution. But things like Sicario and The Counselor and Ex Machina, it's like, So yeah, no preaching, just advocacy for your own expanded awareness and experience. Bacon appended a quotation from Nietzsche saying that it corresponded very much to his own way of thinking, notably about the complex question of realism. He says, "There is no event, no phenomena, no word, no thought which does not have a multiplicity of meanings." Exactly. Words can change experience, and experience changes words. Dictionaries are not authorities on what words mean. They are descriptive, and they describe how words are used. They're a lagging indicator, or ignorant even of particular contextual uses. Who gets to say? I love malapropisms and urban slang. 5011, meaning a lot, with a subtle hint of ridiculousness. Or it's even a mismatch of what even a quantity is. So, hours of humorous fun to be had on Reddit. See the subreddit Bon Apple Tea. But it goes deeper and deeper. The objects in Bacon's paintings, take for example the umbrella. Why? It's not for the purpose of keeping dry or cool. The significance of the shadows now come to the fore. The body lives in the shadow. The shadow is what has escaped the body. The body is of the foam, is from stardust, wants to return there, wants to escape its torturous existence, tired of importing more energy to do all it can just to stand still. It's unnatural. It's absurd for us to exist. It's a perversion, a sickness, almost a cancer itself, a disease, yet because we are that. Like the cat in the skyscraper, we normalise the one which we are. Being human with a head on the shoulders is normal for humans. And our perception, even when shifted, is limited by what we can conceive. And I'm sure there's a quote from The Matrix in there, something about being able to understand or see options beyond understanding or not being able to understand it. It's been a while since I watched those films. Great films, loved them. So yeah, language and art, communication is a process of conveying from one human to another. A window of conception widens perception, widens thinking, widens meanings. And I'm not quite there, but it seems there is a next level even to this, like Waitskin's description of chess, or the description in Zen and the Art of Archery, that when perception becomes so wide, meaning becomes all-encompassing, almost that we ourselves are becoming meaning, that there's no differential barrier between perception, meanings, and who we are. It's just like a journey of flow through it all. And it's kind of like a you and me and I am you kind of thing. Yeah, not quite there, but that's kind of like what it seems like, where it's going. I mean, it'd be quite obvious to say something like, if everything is meaningful, or everything has meaning, then nothing has meaning. And that's kind of the point. It all is and it all isn't, that kind of Zen state. So yeah, back to Bacon and the paintings, the umbrellas. The umbrella is an escape portal. And so the syringes in the paintings, it's not that the substance is injected into the body, it's an escape portal for the body. It's the same with the screams and the inferred violent spasms in his artwork. It reveals, like the head without face, reveals the blip of consciousness that absurdly flashes into existence. The use of smiles and screams, back to the differentiation of hysteria and ecstasy. Which is it? How can we tell? So I get this strong sense looking at a few of his paintings and reading around a bit that this kind of tension, this dichotomy, this exaggeration to reveal the hidden forces is in operation on many levels. There's always a tension. And to me, this is why his work's so grabby. You see something and it's on one level, you get it, and then that kind of reveals the next level that leads to the next question. And so that's why I think it's quite brilliant work. And, Bacon said it himself, it's not even a language of words. If it were, he could just simply write that essay. So I think I've said this one quite a few times in the videos now, that life itself is a remarkable emergent phenomena of sustained order and complexity. For living systems, disorder is death, and living systems cheat death by importing energy to maintain necessary order. Living things constantly build order to overcome the tendency towards disorder. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. On one side of the bloodstream, there's the osmotic pressure of the chemical gradients, on the other, the mechanical pressure of the heart. Even the heart, systolic, diastolic. Between the two, or because of the two, the dance emerges with a rhythm. Life itself has no mouth, no organs, no belly, no brain. It's wholly non-organic. The organism is not life. It's what imprisons it. Likewise, the body itself is not an organic thing. It's a label for a collection of things, yet it lives. Evidence, I suppose, of that emergent phenomena we call life. So as I said at the outset, I'm kind of green when it comes to art, but I suspect this rhythm, the bit between the figures, is what Bacon was getting at. Figures are too obvious, the narrative even too obvious, and he even said that he tried to avoid narrative. If there was a narrative, he'd just write it. And so I suppose if narrative is present in his work, I suspect it's unintentional. I even think he worked to remove it. The smile without the cat, the body without the organs, the head without a face. Kind of gets a bit metaphysical for me at this level. Boundary conditions, the utility of words, the usefulness of slicing and dicing, thinking. It's a bit of a Zen trip. I kind of remember one thing I read in one of Robert Dilt's books on changing belief systems, where he described the obliteration and destruction caused by missiles and bombs. But he told the story in reverse. We raise people from the dead, reassemble the missile, lift it up into the air, into a waiting aircraft that flies it speedily to a base. The missiles are carefully removed from the aircraft and dismantled. Those dangerous parts are then placed deep in the earth, where they can't hurt anyone. So kind of like a commentary on entropy and the arrow of time, temporal constraints. I'm kind of excited by virtual reality because it can simulate things that really do happen that we just don't perceive, like time and space dilations. That's kind of funky stuff, but it's real. The faster you move, your time slows down. It's kind of weird, and it's only noticeable to human perception at significant percentages of the speed of light. Nevertheless, it's always present, just not really perceivable. Even so, these boundary conditions themselves are in a way temporary and in flux, as evolution carves out new pathways by all sorts of directly and indirectly consequential means. A kind of permanent temporary. Yes. It's all getting a bit freaky now. Social and cultural dimensions, shifting norms, mechanical differences, technological progress. All these things constrained by, identity or even tradition and ceremony. In a way, almost exemplified, I suppose, by standards of beauty or standards of norm, standards of what's acceptable. In a way, I want to call that beauty. Somewhere at the boundary conditions, order exists just long enough to bubble up a new status quo, and on it goes. Destructive innovation, as Schumpeter made famous, the changing face of beauty. And I had to have a little laugh to myself as well as I thought about this and had insight. So, what do you get when you exploit people's hang-ups and anxieties by showing them, or at least convincing them, that they're a deviant of normal, or, outside of what is measured to be specifically beautiful? And it just so happens you have a product that purports to either hide or mask or deflect those defects whilst enhancing the positive features to converge on what's an accepted model of beauty. Well, there was a chap who did just this. His name was Maximilian Faktorowicz, and he not only made a device to measure deviations from what was considered beautiful, he put this framework on a person's head to make tiny measurements, and of course all the Hollywood models came in to be measured to see how they fared to the ideal standard. And wouldn't you know, they were all different. But this is the great con, isn't it? It's like, whilst they're all different from a specific standard, the differences between people are actually the lesser part of it. In other words, we're more similar than we're more different. So the differences are the minutiae, there's the small details, but of course that difference counts. And what's flabbergasting to me is, how did he come up with what the standard measurements should be for beauty? Well, he just took the averages of everyone. That just tickled me so much when I found that out. Let's take everyone's measurements, get the average of what that is, and then define that as beauty. And then obviously everyone who's going to get measured according to this average is going to be different, and therefore a deviant of the idealized standard of beauty. But we also have a solution for them. We can literally put paint on their faces to accentuate certain features, or to make it look like they've got rosier cheeks or a higher cheekbone or darker eyes or brighter eyes. And I'm sure you've put it together now, but if you take the first halves of the guy's name, you'll come up with a cosmetic company. So yeah, how to monetize people's anxiety. I don't know whether I could do it. I don't know whether it does people a service or not. I don't know, divided. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that's like, here's a device, or here's, makeup to cover up or enhance, or put on a facade, put on a war paint to cover it up, whereas Bacon seems to go the other way. No, explore your deviancy. Go further, go to extremes, explore that, because that is you. Why put a mask on? Comes back to, he got good at spotting people who wore masks, because he saw that if you're wearing this type of mask, then that almost signals what you think your deficit is. That's why you're wearing a mask, to make up for that particular deficit. So he seemed to work out all these codes, and after a while, when you get used to all these different masks that people wear, the different kind of language they use, the move away from language, the contractive language, the engaging language, you can just start to see the hang-ups and anxieties, or the lack of them, that the individuals you're talking with have. They just signal it in their language. Again, knowing that almost behooves a responsibility to react accordingly. Make it okay for them. Make it easy. That seems to me what greatness does. And that led me on to another insight. We have limited perception, limited vision in terms of having an overall arching view of what's going on in the world. So we only see what others see as reflected in the marketplace of ideas. we only become aware of things because someone in our network mentioned it or because we saw it on the news channel. It's the fads, it's the new experiences to be had that suddenly become sought after, only because they're deviations from the average that we become aware of. That is, to remain average now, to be like everyone else, to fit in, we have to follow those emergent trends that now get normalized. But they're only trends that become trends because they're visible through our narrow window of what our closest friends are interested in, or the news channels that we select, or the books that we read, or the heroes or influencers that we follow. So it's kind of funny because the wider you go, I think the more we can realise that this is just a belief stack. So it's at best a gestalt of accidental occurrences, a meandering of events to which a narrative is retrofitted to form an identity. And to me, that's really kind of funny, because the importance and attachment to that identity is defended so strong, sometimes to the death. And it all seems to be from an overweighted evaluation of what's perceived to be invested in time, but was merely coincidental. You didn't have any choice about which country you were born in. You didn't have any choice about what religion or political beliefs your parents had. There could be bump into friends at school and a significant life-changing event happens just because, well, there's no rhyme or reason. It's just one of those things, and it kind of starts to form your experience and your opinion about the world. And over time, it's how we define ourselves. And this can largely be attributed to the groups that we see ourselves as a member of. And the kicker, the real swift knee to the happy sack, is we know that there's now other groups out there. And so we exaggerate the differences between our group and other groups to make those boundary conditions more defined. So, what I was referencing to earlier, when we meet people, we might be 95% aligned, but that 5% difference doesn't really make any material difference, but it's now weighted to account for more than the 95% that we are the same. And we start to form these complex social and prejudicial biases to undermine the other, which just emboldens our own position. It's ridiculous, really, and, it becomes misinformed, exaggerated, and an illusion. Kind of like, heavy kurtotic effects, absurd amplifications based upon much earlier exposure to a single data point that was likely as not an outlier event itself, not actually within the norm. And because of that reason, because it was outside of the norm, we actually noticed it, based our entire life around it. Fuck. Oh, and then it gets more complicated by the question of free will and choice. No wonder we're bloody neurotic. Well played, Groucho. Yeah, well played, Bacon. So first was the object itself. Photorealism. Captured that. Been done. Then along came the representation of movement in still images and paintings. Been done. So Bacon knew he had to innovate, had to do something different. And Bacon's paintings reveal the forces that produce those movements, so much so that the motion itself is irrelevant, as are the figures themselves and the objects. These are the forces of expansion and contraction, the diastolic, the systolic, in, out, distortion and contortion. What force makes us smile? What force makes us scream? What are forces? What, if anything, drives those? And at what level? Global, tribal, societal, community, individually, or even in a smaller subset of our compartmentalized parts of mind? What drives our own values? The inner values and the changes and importance between them depending on contexts of time, space, energy. Sort of like a presence of force. It's like that which arises out of a building's architecture that forms the spandrels. Is it the architecture that creates the spandrels, or is it actually the spandrels that give definition to the form? So yeah, going back a little bit to submodalities model in NLP, I did quite a few videos of this in the Facebook group. So we have mental representations, via the common senses, so-called visual, audio, kinesthetic, and so on. And in specific regard to the visuals and our mental imagery, the size of things in our mind's eye, as it were, the spatial location and orientation, the clarity or contrast, seems to be a driver for the importance or meaning, or at least the focus of our attention. So, for example, when you thought of that elephant, was it close, in your mind's eye, or was it a mere grey speck on a very distant horizon? How does the distance of that imagined object, as it moves closer or goes further away, change the sensational meaning of that image? Or perhaps you actually viewed the top of an elephant's head and you imagined actually sitting on its back. Viewing it like that, does it change things? Perspective. Again, it alludes to kind of relative distance and Hofstede's thingy about social and cultural differences. So again, we've got it explained at many different levels: societal, individual, parts, even some modalities. All these different levels in operation. So maybe in the next video we'll get on to Dave Grossman and how taking these distances between people and exaggerating them is the conditioning required for killing. It purposefully changes meaning of human life while simultaneously diminishes the significance or impact of the act of killing. And in that regard, I think F.A. gives us a warning about grief and regret. Once those actions are done, they can't be undone, and no matter how much you grieve, how much you regret it, it's worthless. You can't buy anything with grief, yet people will pay kingdoms to have their grief lifted. So in regard to painting and its visual component, we're considering sizes and shapes, contrast, textures, colours, and the use of exaggeration by clever use of these devices. This is obvious. It provides attention though via visual cues, sensations and emotional distance, incongruence, conflict, novelty. How do sizes, patterns, lines, contrast, focus, proportions change meaning? Again, the example of the cat on a skyscraper. Are they additive to the meaning, subtractive to meaning, augmentative, diminutive? Do they convey brevity or verbosity, harshness or softness, and so on? And again, sensation from tension, I would gather or guess that this is almost the next level of obviousness. It's beginner level stuff. But here we start to have a control over the intensity of those sensations. So it might be worth pointing out explicitly that once we grant external locus of control for these processes to external agency, we start to let external agency tell us what to say. And then it's a small step as to tell us what to think. And then it's an extremely small step as to tell us what to do. So for me, with the current climate and what's going on and the polarization, and I've even started to see it in my own family, it's significant to investigate art, to realize that the invitation to its experience of losing oneself while learning how to keep control of that and reaching one's own conclusions and strip away the presented narrative or the propaganda that wraps around the truth, as it were, and just learn how to enjoy the descent without it being a destructive experience. So in other words, you can have an experience or sensation that's out of control, but still maintain an internal locus of control. That is to say that just because it feels uncomfortable, discomforting, or induces anxiety, means that you've got to find yourself in there. Reaching up for a hand, or reaching up for someone to tell you, or reaching up for your insecurities to be taken away, or for your validation, or for your judgments to be verified by an external force, this is the test. So I keep harping on about the inner light and the experience, the sensations of Bacon's art honed over a lifetime can last not just a few hours or a few days or weeks, but a lot longer, and I think the artist may have hoped for this. The same I can say for the film The Counsellor. It parallels Bacon's work, especially with Bacon's triptychs. We can see in the left panel of Bacon's triptychs how attention or a sensation moves in comparison to the right panel. So, for example, look at the triptych from 1973. The left panel shows a man on the toilet, presumably ejecting excreta. The panel on the right shows a man bent over the sink, presumably ejecting vomit. So the functioning action is the same, ejecting waste, yet from two ends. And for both actions of expulsion to occur, what is present but not seen is the contractions, The apparent distortions in Bacon's work expose those necessary forces, hitherto unknown and not explicitly seen. What is the nature of the force that does that to a human? And if Bacon has done his work each time, it's a new force or something different from the shadows or going to the shadows. And if you've seen The Counsellor, it's got a bit of a sick joke wrapped around the entire film. How does the film start? It starts with the counsellor giving oral sex, or colloquially head, to his girlfriend. Noticeably, she does not reciprocate until the end of the film. Well, if you haven't seen it, then spoiler, skip ahead 15 seconds. But the film ends with his girlfriend delivering her head back to the counsellor in a rather grotesque manner. Very clever, bit of a, as I say, sick joke. The whole film is like that. Sensation via descent. We don't actually see the power or the forces that did that in both cases. We can only imagine, and Westray's rather unnerving description of other events, the implications of where the counsellor's actions will lead, cracks open our mind, subtly starts to fall. Our own barriers of shock are slowly edged away as the film progresses. Moral dissent, something that I kind of detect going on in the world right now. Morals and ethics, diplomacy's dead. And with moral dissent, we're stripped of our kind of defences. We're reduced, we're dissolved and become vulnerable and all alone. We're going to this dissent. And I think the caution, the warning is not to look to others for a hand or a grip on reality, but to maintain our own inner locus of control. And that's the thing, this descent, it never ends, it keeps on going, so it's even more important to find inner light, inner locus of control. So I think Bacon's work and The Counsellor, it's quite the masterpiece. So it's not even about a fall or a descent into some kind of new entropy or some new equilibrium. It's all about a sensation, the tension is experienced in the fall, and it has to keep falling for us to continue to have these sensations. So the effects, the message, the meta-narrative has to continue after the film is finished, and the cognition or the process needs to carry on after the person's viewed the painter's work. So I've got to say, these kinds of films, these paintings, this kind of art, it's certainly rattled my cage for the last few weeks. I'm actually looking forward to getting this mini-series done, moving on, and trying to get over the moral injury. It's not good to be here too long, I think. Nevertheless, the fall, the experience of sensations, the unhinged tension, nothing to hold on to. The level of abstraction is perfectly designed so that the sensation is felt without the ability to grab onto something specific as an anchor. That's quite a feat of design. So some people criticise The Counsellor, the film, as having flat characters. Maybe, but again, I think this is by design. It means that when the horror comes, when you see it, when your brain recognises it, albeit too late, there's no one character to which you can pinpoint a reference as any kind of measure or any kind of, he was right, that's the crux of the film. There's no one to go to. You've already slipped past the event horizon. You're already in the fall. You're not observing it, but experiencing it. And every character in the film is morally ambiguous. There's no reference point. So if you do watch the film, or if you remember the scene where the counsellor is buying a diamond for his fiancée, the dealer describes it as the cynical business of looking for imperfections, as a pure diamond would be absolutely transparent. You would not see it if it were not for the imperfections. It's absolutely the same metaphor. It's a cynical business, the dealer warns. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant. Same with Bacon's paintings. So there's an old joke, I'm sure you've heard it before. It's about a prison. New guy goes to prison, and all he hears is people shouting out numbers. 37, and everyone laughs. It's brilliant, brilliant. Silence for a moment. 27, everyone cracks out laughing. Yeah, hysterical, good one, good one. And the new guy is like, what's going on? Someone says, well, everyone's been in here so long, we don't get to hear fresh jokes, and the jokes are retold so many times that they just get abbreviated now just to the joke number. So someone calls out 17 and everyone has a good laugh because that was a good joke. Oh, I get it, the newbie says. So, wanted to have a go, he calls out 47. Deadpan silence. It's like, what's going on? Oh yeah, they've heard that one before. Of course, the joke is in the joke and the irony and self-parody. The joke is the cliche of itself. Tropes, memes, ready-made stereotypes, all shortcuts. I wonder if that's what Bacon meant when he said modern man needs a kind of shorthand. I mean, there are memes of memes, and I'm sure there's cliche of cliches, or is that even still just a cliche itself? It's kind of like an invariant thing. So it seems that this is the art, the struggle for all creatives, the resistance and overcoming of the obvious, and then to go further than parody or cliche. My God, to use another cliche, to punch through to the next level, to go deeper, hit pay dirt, and so on. And some, it seems, have sidestepped this, and we've seen recently many a prequel or origin story where the actual story was better left otherwise. Retroactive continuity, retconned, and so on, as it's called, ruined many a franchise and childhood. Anyway, so I'm told, or I've read, that going beyond the beyond is just the first step. Inspiration is not a work of creation. Inspiration is what has to happen to start work. Even then, there is no guarantee, and this might veer off into a discussion on free will or determinism. Regardless, the creation may end up being a sad parody or cliche, and obviously must be destroyed. Probably why Bacon destroyed a lot of his own works. Only the naive viewer or watcher will not see it. And for various reasons, I'd guess that a true artist would always want to do something unique, something different. As Bacon said, just don't bore them. So, apart from professional pride and the endeavour within themselves to expand and grow and do something new, and I assume want to do something better for their audience and even their own legacy. I mean, it comes back to what I was rattling on about criticism. Most often artists are their own harshest critics. And what do we, the naive, the laity, tell them? Oh, that's brilliant. Or, the brush strokes on that are a bit heavy. When the whole piece was made by snapping a leather strap loaded with paint onto a surface. And no paintbrushes were used. And so, I never really like compliments myself. I often found them to be unuseful, except as a gauge, perhaps, to test people's honesty. I knew when I'd done shoddy work, and when someone says, oh wow, that's fantastic, I knew they were full of shit. But I stopped short of telling them. I've learned a new phrase. Well, I'm glad you liked it. That's even funnier now. I've been so naive. So yeah, Pepiat describes how Bacon used the reverse of the canvas, much more unforgiving, and mistakes could not easily be wiped away. I guess this was Bacon drifting, and in that process of mistakes, a randomness and a commitment was introduced, and in that randomness, the probability that a cliché would arise is minimal. I think it was one way of avoiding that. I also have to mention how it seems similar to economic forecasting and probability curves, normal distributions and standard deviations, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 sigmas, the basis of 6 sigma processes, define processes with an error margin to 6 sigma, ridiculously tight. But like the financial meltdown of 2006-07, where events totally outside of the consideration of 6 sigma probabilities actually happened. Apocryphally, some events even at 10 or 12 sigmas were reported to be happening. But this is it. Random chance? Or was it simply a limitation of what could be conceived of as possible? The limits of perception. Disaster recovery, another thing. Yeah, that aside though, this chance thing or randomness, and we're taking a random walk down Wall Street again, it brushes up against free will and determinism, complicated subject, subtle strokes on the canvas, chance. But then to see how to use that and leap from it in a purposeful way, that's the trick. In a way, you're already in it. The artist is falling before his strokes hit the canvas, and it's that fall, that descent, for which the artist already has in mind the task. And now all they have to do is get out. That done, the rendered image will be the result. The only way out is to avoid clichés. That's just another fall. And with parody, the descent goes further. So I reckon these are the remarks Bacon made about Giacometti, that you have to start afresh every day. You have to abandon yesterday, or at least rise from a new descent, or you're just living off clichés of the past, regurgitating parodies, writing prequels and origin stories. Oh my God, if that isn't a recipe for manic hysteria, I don't know what is. And it seems to be what Bacon was all about, experiencing this descent, these sensations, this tension, the antagonism of boundary conditions, in short, life. I also get a sense that some of these business gurus out there try to explain this, I think I'm finally getting it. It's the questions from anxiety and fear rather than from life. You know, some of these gurus shout and scream, you know, you guys, you're asking wrong questions, you're asking stupid questions, you're finding new ways to fuck it up. These kind of obvious questions are, why do people fail? What happens if something goes wrong? It's not that these are bad questions or that they're even wrong. The successful person simply has no mind to ever have asked these questions. They likely will have asked, how can this be more fun? How can this be expanded to include more people? How can I motivate better? It's a focus thing. It's a rise from descent. It's an innovation. It's a mindset thing. Yeah, so check out Bacon's paintings, watch The Counselor, and Sicario if you haven't. Good films. Just prepare a strong state of mind though. And I mean, in terms of the locus of control, it might not make a difference. Anyway, I'll drop a couple of links in the description to resources that I use to gain insights into this greatness.